the body of someone who's dead, however awful he may have been, or you think he may have been. And in the play, set in ancient Thebes, Antigone's brother is killed. He's fought against the king, her uncle, and against his other brother. He was killed, and the king instructed the citizens of Thebes that his body must be left outside so that the vultures and the dogs and the animals eat it. And his sister went to bury the body on her own and admitted it. And this conversation took place in the play. It's all mythology, but it reflects something. The king asks her, "Your act of grace in his regard is crime, i.e. to bury the body is a crime." Antigone, "The corpse below would never say it was." Creon, "When you honor him and the criminal just alike?" Antigone, "It was a brother, not a slave who died." Creon, "Died to destroy this land that we guarded." Antigone, "Death yearns for equal law for all the dead." Creon, "Not that the good and bad draw equal shares." Antigone, "Who knows that this is holiness below?" Creon, "Never the enemy, even in death, a friend." Antigone, "I cannot share in hatred, but in love." And there are numerous other examples. In Homer's Iliad, for instance, when King Priam of Troy goes to plead with Achilles that the body is returned of Hector, his son, who has been killed by Achilles, and the body is returned. So I'm saying that this is a thoughtless thing that they did, and it's gone down very badly. But then look at it from another point of view too. If you say that it is fine to take out someone who has targeted you and hit in a terrorist act 2 targets in your country, if it is justified for you to do it, is it justified for an Iraqi to target the farm in Crawford, Texas? No, I'm just saying, let's think about it and take out the people who declared war on Iraq, and that country has lost over 1 million people, and there are 5 million orphans. Infinitely worse than anything these jokers did, horrific though it was. So once you start on this path, you then make it possible for, people will say there's the same law for us then. And if you carry on like this, we will take people out too. Of course, we know the Israelis have been targeting Palestinian leaders for years. And no one says anything apart from a handful of people. But this act, basically violating the sovereignty of a country and taking the guy out, is something which is going to work its way through the system for some time. It isn't over yet. And what astonished me were 2 things on US television that I saw. One was they showed these videos of bin Laden sitting huddled up with a poor shawl, watching videos. And the General Kermit or someone, whoever CNN hires to do the commentary for them, a former US military officer, explained this by saying, the reason we're showing this is to show the Arabs and that Muslim world that this guy who you think is invincible, here he is sitting there, an old man watching television. He's not that powerful. But I said, who in the world thinks that he's invincible? Certainly no one in the Muslim world thinks. They know people get old and die. How will that impact on anyone? It had absolutely nil impact anywhere else? Or was it designed for the US audience to show them that, look, he's a pathetic old guy, but in which case, why take him out? You know, why not bring him back alive? And the other aspect of this is the exaltation and the demonstrations that took place. In DC, in New York, in other places, on campuses, I was told, people wrapping themselves in the flag and saying, we got him. It is a sign that the political culture of this country is becoming more and more debased, regardless of the change in the presidency. And how does this educate people? I mean, what did we think about people, or what did people here think about people? Handful, tiny handful, and largely, mainly in a few countries in Latin America, Central America, who celebrated 9/11. People went mad. This is disgusting. Mercifully, very few, no one, hardly anyone did it in the Muslim world because they knew what was coming. But the shock that some people had celebrated that, but not being able to think that through. If that is wrong, how is this right? And this world of double standards and selective vigilantism is not a world that is going forward in any remotely progressive way. And where is it all going to end? I mean, the notion that bin Laden's death changes anything is a huge joke to start off with, because the war in Afghanistan is carrying on. Any idea that the Afghans would be completely demoralized by his death and say, we're surrendering, I mean, you know, it's a complete joke. In fact, they don't particularly care. A huge wing of these people said to the Americans after 9/11, give us time and we'll capture him and hand him over to you. A minority of them said, no, he's our guest, we won't. But quite a lot were prepared to do that, saying this, we didn't approve this. Some of this is in the 9/11 official commission report. So it'll pass, but it's an event which has left its mark. And how it's going to affect relations with Pakistan is now an open question. Because it's really, the way they did it was incredibly provocative. And the Pakistani Chief of Staff, General Kiani, very close to the Pentagon, not a guy I particularly like, he did say something quite entertaining. He said, you know, this is bad enough, but what I can't bear is the thought that there'll be at least 3 or 4 Hollywood movies now to celebrate this. And he's absolutely right on that. I'm told that Catherine Bigelow has already got a script worker working on it. So, you know, we will see this repeated, become a big event. In fact, I mean, if one looks at it totally cynically, it's basically an event which has launched the campaign to re-elect the president. And his, ratings have altered. But if the economy stays stable, I think this will be seen as one of those events. In the meantime, while the situation in this part of the world is really serious now, in the Arab world, things are changing, and young people especially have moved forward. Political consciousness is higher than it has been since the 50s and 60s in the Arab world. And if people here want to claim that it was Facebook that done it, fine. You know, the thing about this, of course people use everything they can, texting, Facebooks, why shouldn't they? It's great. But the point I make about all that, because there's been so much about it, especially in the US press, that of course they used whatever means they could to communicate. But when the Egyptian government cut off texting, and the guy who owns the largest company, the Vodafone franchise in Egypt, collaborated with them and texting wasn't permitted, the movement didn't come to an end. And historically, people use the best means they find to communicate. They communicated via drums during the slave uprisings in Haiti and elsewhere. That was the way they communicated, with drums. In the big uprisings against the British in India, they sent messages by hand, written on paper, etc., etc. Radio came in later, transmitters. So it's, you know, when the means of communication have become revolutionized, why shouldn't they be used? And they will be used. And that's great. But that on its own doesn't explain anything. Now, the other two aspects which I think need to be stressed is that political freedoms are being won. Economic freedoms and economic and social rights are not being won till now. The Tunisians are going to put that in their constitution, I'm told. A lot of Tunisian people I've spoken to said, we are going to have a charter not just of human rights and political freedoms, but of social rights, by which we mean the right to work, the right to shelter, the right to education, the right to health is going to be in our constitution, which is as it should be. Because liberty without equality soon becomes pretty meaningless. Doesn't become unimportant, but in terms of affecting the lives of people, it becomes like that. And then the question remains is, will these regimes, as they develop over the next 5 to 6 years, be capable of working together in the region and defending common interests against the powers who try and crush them? I mean, there's a new book out. I've forgotten the name of the guy who's written it, actually. It's a very good book, short book, which just documents the discussions between the oil companies that took place before they launched the war on Iraq. I mean, I never thought the war was exclusively about oil, and I still don't. But of course, for the oil companies, the war was exclusively about oil. and there were, you know, machinations going on, negotiations with US companies, with Iraqis, saying if we come in, this is what we're going to do, etc. And the same thing is now going on with Libya, by the way, that the oil companies are hovering around there like vultures. So it isn't over yet, is what I mean to say. And the citizens of this world will have to guard these rights. They have already won, and use them to move forward if we are going to see real, lasting social range in a region which has the world's cheapest oil still underneath its lands. That is what gives this region its strategic importance, and this is why billions of dollars are spent on its security. But it has shaken that entire world. All the little statelets, the Gulf kingdoms, are very nervous indeed. I don't know whether you saw this report, some of you will have, that the Blackwater guys are building now an army in Abu Dhabi, a mercenary army, to protect the Abu Dhabi royal family. And because the Abu Dhabians, who used to rely on Pakistanis and Yemenis to do this work for them, to keep them going, and the Saudis too, used to rely on Pakistanis, Yemenis and Jordanians to do this work, but now they don't trust them because of what's happening in Pakistan, Yemen, and Jordan, and these places. So they want people brought in totally from the outside. And huge numbers of Colombians and Central Americans are being recruited, i.e.